Hi, this is Paul, and the rest of the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris conversations have now been released by Pangburn. Jordan Peterson has released the Dublin one on his stream, and I suppose he'll release the London one soon. You can find them all on the Pangburn channel. And now I've listened to the Dublin and the London ones, not as much as the Vancouver ones, but this last section, after they resolve the question and answer thing in London, I think is quite revelatory in terms of what's happening in this debate. And I think Douglas Murray makes a good appearance here, so I don't have a PowerPoint, I'm just going to run through it and make comments on it as we go. So here we go.
Okay, well, I'll ask you something. Let's go back to one of the core problems that.
So again, I think it's helpful when Peterson is kind of driving the train here, because he's the one that seems to have a picture of the project and an orderly way of proceeding, whereas Sam just kind of keeps plinking around, and Douglas Murray has his own take on this.
That we've been trying to address, which is the apparent failure, perhaps, of the rationalist atheist types to develop an active ethos that has sufficient beauty and motivational power to serve as a credible replacement for the religious rituals. So there must be a reason why that failure has occurred.
Now this point is an important one, and see here right away I say I didn't do a PowerPoint, now I miss it. Okay, Melanie Brewster. Why is psychology silent when it comes to atheism? I've played this one before, and yeah, this is
doing this work, and
this is a video where she goes into it and talks about well-being and the issues with the atheism, and she herself is an atheist. She's I don't know exactly how she categorizes herself. She's a university professor, gender, LGBT, non-binary, something of this nature. And so she ends her little presentation with, once again, an admonition, a little bit of sermonizing about how on earth the atheists can organize themselves, how on earth the atheists can establish communities, how on earth the atheists can establish their own congregations. Please, 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 she begs, can we please organize ourselves? And Jordan Peterson's point here is this has failed, and there've been a number of attempts. Perhaps the most successful attempt at it has been in some mainline denominations that have attempted to, you can find, if you search Dutch atheist minister, you can find a pastor in the Protestant Church of the Netherlands who claims to be an atheist. Recently there was a woman who was a minister in the Canadian mainline denomination who was kicked out because of her atheism, and that was just a bridge too far, and that kind of goes to reinforce some of the points that Sam Harris was making. But so this is Jordan Peterson's question. He's saying, okay, Sam, you want this pure rationality. Why hasn't your project worked? It's been around a fairly long time. Why can't the atheists get together and establish their own communities and really do this thing upright?
Yeah. Right? So do you have any sense of what the reason might be?
I can give you a short list of reasons. One is that traditionally the impulse to do that in a religious context has been fatal, right? So to declare your apostasy has been the almost as reliable a way of committing suicide as jumping off a building in most cultures and most societies for the longest time, and still is in many places, as you know, in the Muslim world. So
he's saying, well, in the Muslim world it hasn't happened, but we've had religious freedom in the West for a very long time, and while this Canadian pastor did lose her job for declaring herself an atheist, and that was even too far for the United Church of Canada. So Sam has a point, but I don't think it fully addresses the whole question that Peterson is asking.
There's been a barrier to entry to thinking creatively about alternatives to religion. And so much of atheism and secularism is just a pitched battle against the eroding power of religion. I mean, when religion really has its power, right? We know what it's like. I mean, again, I think we spoke about this at one point. The moment that it makes this most salient is Galileo being shown the instruments of torture by men who wouldn't look through his telescope.
I would encourage people to take a deeper look, a higher resolution look at the Galileo incident.
Right? I mean, that was the point of contact between untrammeled human rationality and the womb that bore it, right? The religious awe.
Because Galileo was really being, there were a number of political issues involved, and also Galileo was being criticized for chucking out Aristotle, not the Bible.
At the beauty of the heavens, right? So the moment a person like Galileo stepped a little too far, and to connect this to astrology again, Galileo was a court astrologer, right? I mean, so there was a point of contact between astronomy and astrology at that point. So we're still under the shadow of that kind of dogmatism and oppression in much of the world. I mean, for the longest time. I mean, it's still in the United States, you cannot run for the presidency without pretending to believe in God. It's amazing.
Which is a really interesting point, because we've had a good number of presidents who were not church-going people, and we've had a lot of presidents, probably most of the presidents for the 20th century have been nominal-ish Christians. Even some of those most recently, and of course the point with astrology and the presidency is interesting, given the incidents of the Reagans in the White House and Nancy Reagan's penchant for astrology.
Amazing fact, right? When will that change? Someday it will, but we have just had.
I don't know that it will, because of all of the reasons that Peterson keeps pointing out.
Had almost no time to
Samuel,
experiment in this space and innovate.
Well, there's
in
been
this space.
some time. There've been some decades, and I suppose the thing that unites Jordan and me on this is, if we face some of the problems, some of the enemies, you might even say, that you identify as well, and the question is whether you should face them in the midst of an experiment that may or may not work, i.e. a leap into pure rationality, or whether you might decide it's worth, among other things, taking some of the versions of things that you've had that have been of worth in your past and using them where they're useful.
But what are you picturing there? Because there really is no leap. There's no global leap to pure rationality. There's this incremental erosion of religious answers to terrestrial questions. So there's again, the moment you have a science of neurology.
Here's the subtraction story, as Charles Taylor calls it.
You begin to look at epilepsy not as demonic possession, but as a neurological problem. Before there's a science of neurology, you don't know.
It makes it a little difficult to answer how exorcism continued because of its effectiveness against neurological problems, however.
What the hell's happening, right? So into that
space.
space.
Something obviously drove Douglas, I would say, in some sense, surprisingly, to make the assumption that one of the things that we need to do to defend whatever it is that we have of value in the West, assuming that we have anything of value, was something like the reincorporation of this religious substructure. So it's not something that I would have expected you to conclude.
But what
so
are you
why
picturing?
did you conclude it?
Well, partly for the reason I just suggested, that the leap into pure rationality There's no evidence yet that it's going to work, or there's going to be enough, or enough people are going to be able to partake in it.
But give me the precise place where you're worried that it's going to fail, and what are you imagining
Well,
doing?
you think it's
Let me
failing now.
Yeah, let me give you one example.
Yeah.
I mean, we may be in the midst of the discovery that the only thing worse than religion is its absence.
And where are we discovering that?
Look at the religions that people are making up as we speak. I mean, every day there's a new dogma, and you and I and Jordan have repeatedly tripped over those dogmas. Some usually survived, it has to be said, but they're stampeding to create new religion all the time at the moment. Every new heresy that's invented. And they're not as well thought through as past heresies. They don't always have the bloody repercussions yet, but you can easily foresee a situation in which they do.
Right,
I mean, a new religion is being created as we speak by a new generation of people who think they are non-ideological, who think they're very rational, who think they're past myth, who think they're past story, who think they're better than any of their ancestors and have never bothered to even study their ancestors.
Right. So, but can't you say that dogmatism is the problem? The generic problem here is dogmatism, the firm belief.
Now, in a sense, Sam goes all the way back, if you go to the beginning of Vancouver 1, when Peterson and Peterson and Weinstein basically backed Sam as to saying, okay, it's not necessarily religious dogmatism, but it's dogmatism per se, and unwillingness to change a particular fact or change a particular conviction. And what's interesting here is that Sam is about as dogmatic as you can get on this one point. He keeps coming back to it.
In the absence of good argument and good evidence.
And absolutely, we can agree that dogmatism of any kind.
And to think about my conversation with Adam is a huge Jonathan Haidt fan. Jonathan Haidt's point is that these things bind and blind. And this, in a sense, Sam Harris keeps wanting to pull out the imagined objectivity of this free space where facts are always purely discerned by objective individuals, where in the space in Sam's head, well, everything is crystal clear because it's the space in Sam's head. And this isn't some arena of pure rationality where no one has biases, which leads one to believe that Sam can't see his own biases, that the test of a space would be, and the test of rationality would be, whether others can actually follow your trail. And again, you have the problem of all of these trails start someplace and everyone's starting from a different place.
Has that danger, or will always have that danger. But the void also has a danger. The void that you can create if you throw out all the stories that helped get you to where you are also has this danger, because people come up with these new stories. And every day's news now is about this. Our politics is now basically about this. Actually...
Yeah, and what's flown in to fill the gap seems to be something like a new tribalism.
Absolutely.
Which is exactly what you'd expect in some sense, right? If you demolish the superordinate system, religion divides people, no doubt, but it also unites people.
Yes.
And
Jonathan Haidt.
so one of the things that arguably unites people above their mere tribalism is their union in an abstract religious superstructure. Yeah. And then
this is the whole point of the book of Acts, where suddenly in Antioch you had multiple ethnicities. Now, this ancient city of Antioch had walls not only around the city but within the city to keep the separate ethnic groups apart. And the assumption in the ancient world was that your religion is a function of your ethnicity. So you had Jewish religion, you had Babylonian religion, you had Assyrian religion, and there were some commonalities between them that helped the groups kind of understand each other. And then polytheism was the means by which hopefully different groups could, in fact, not kill each other over religion. But what happened in Christianity was that this got broken. And now, and you find this again and again mentioned in the New Testament, where slaves are free, Gentiles and Jews Scythians, all manner of barbarians now are brothers and sisters. Read the book of Philemon, where that is applied to the question of slavery in the New Testament. This is one of the key things that Christianity did in the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire was bound together by the worship of the emperor, but within a polytheistic context, the worship of the empire was kind of like paying your taxes or pledging allegiance to the flag. You could maintain your emperor worship and maintain all of your other deities, maintain your local ethnic deity, maintain your civic deity, maintain the imperial cult, and by having polytheism, you could have all of these together. What happens in Christianity is that this, as Paul says, the barrier that causes hostility is broken down, and now the traditional ways in the ancient world of enmity between people becomes resolved via union in Christ. And that is one of the major advances that Christianity offered to the ancient world. And the point that Peterson is making is that once you take that away, people are now simply reverting back to the ways that they separated each other before Christianity.
And if you demolish that, well, then one of the things that does seem to happen is the emergence of a reflexive tribalism, because people need a group identity of sorts. And the easiest thing to do seems to be to revert to ethnicity and race and gender and sex, etc., etc. And then we do end up, and have ended up, in this situation that Douglas outlines. And, one of the things I think that distinguishes us temperamentally, possibly, maybe because you're a little more on the liberal side and I'm a little more on the conservative side, even temperamentally speaking, is that your fundamental terror is that of fundamentalism, although you also state in the moral landscape that you understand the perils of nihilism. And I would say my fundamental terror is that of nihilism, even though I'm sensitive to the catastrophes of fundamentalism. But I don't think you do address the problem of the void sufficiently, because I don't think that you have anything to offer except...
Now pay attention, the void is going to come up a number of times in this conversation. The void is this space that once religion recedes, what do people fill it with? Now again, G.K. Chesterton was stated to have said, it isn't that when people stop believing, they believe in nothing, they'll believe in anything. And that may or may not be from G.K. Chesterton, but that's the void that they're talking about here.
And I'm not trying to minimize your offering. You make a case that people should work to alleviate suffering and that we should live in truth, but Jesus, Sam, you can summarize that in 2 sentences. It doesn't have the potency of the fictional, literary, artistic substructure that seems necessary to make that into something that's a compelling story.
And they've dealt with this in a number of the past points, where Peterson has been making the points that as a delivery system that actually motivates people, religion and story is powerful. And Sam's project is underwhelming, and the evidence, we're talking about evidence here, the evidence for the underwhelming power of this is, in fact, its inability to take off over the last 100 and some odd years that it has had a great degree of power in the West. And so both Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray are making the point that, Sam, your project has failed. It has never really gone anywhere. And again, we could go back to Melanie Brewster and the constant admonition to, okay, atheists, let's get our act together. And what Peterson, as a clinical psychologist, is basically saying, this isn't how people work. You're not going to undo the formation of human beings that has been around thousands, if not millions of years.
Well, so this is where we might disagree. This could be a fundamental disagreement.
Yeah.
I don't see the problem of nihilism the way you do, or the way it's advertised. Like once you rip out the false certainties and the bad evidence and the bad arguments and the mere dogmas imposed on us by prior generations, that hole never...
Right there. There's Sam Harris. Just right there.
Closes safely with anything else. You have to put something in its.
So in other words, there's no void in me, there's no hole in me. It's closed completely. I'm just fine. But a little bit from now we're going to hear about, well, there's been some smuggling going on, Sam.
Place that's shaped just like that, some other false certainty or some other story. And I simply don't think that's the case. I think there's so many things we outgrow, both in.
Okay, but what Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson are offering Sam Harris here is evidence. And evidence is supposed to be what Sam Harris is all about. And what he's essentially doing is sticking to his dogma.
Individually, in our own childhoods, and culturally, that where there is no void left. There's no Santa Claus shaped void that we have to fill with the exact same thing.
But people certainly experience that.
Some people,
void.
I'm not discounting the fact that it is hard to be happy in this world. I mean, we are living in a world that seems perfectly designed to frustrate our efforts.
Now, that business about hard to be happy is interesting because, again, the assertion of Sam Harris in his project is that you don't need God to be happy. You don't need God to have meaning. You don't need God to this is God number one now, to finish off all of the problems of the world. You don't need God to do that. Rationality is sufficient. And now implicit in this is that the tools of the world are sufficient. And this is where I think the affluent Western assumption beneath Sam Harris becomes obvious that, well, this is lovely, Sam. If you're healthy, wealthy, dare I say, privileged, and life within this context is going great. What if you're not as good looking as Sam? You're not as smart as Sam. You're not as healthy as Sam. You weren't born in the right place in the right time as Sam is. And now Sam is saying, buck up. Sorry, no religion for you. I don't know why you can't just be happy with the cars and the technology and the internet and all of these things. But Sam also is a sort of a moralist. And okay, well, stay away from porn and, and if you really get scared in the middle of the night, by no means should you pray to Jesus because you're just going to make things worse. And Peterson is a clinical psychologist, and he deals with people in their pain. He deals with people who are, and listen to Jordan Peterson's lectures, the kinds of patients that he's had before he was famous, who they've got low IQ, they've got agoraphobia, if you're a clinical psychologist, you are going to see the painful edge of humanity. And if you look at Scott Adams, I've used this in previous videos, how much pain out there is there? Maybe I can pause it and find it. This is what happens when I don't do a PowerPoint. Not Scott Adams, Scott Alexander. A wonderful post, December 24, 2015, How Bad Are Things? Slate Star Codex. One advantage of working in psychiatry is getting a window into the otherwise invisible world of really miserable people. It's the same thing as being a pastor. I work in a wealthy, mostly white college town consistently ranked one of the best places to live in the country. This is the kind of place, Sam Harris would say, his project has succeeded to a great degree. If there's anywhere that you might dare to hope wasn't filled to the brim, and again, Scott Alexander is an atheist, one of the places filled to the brim with people living, it wasn't filled to the brim with people living hopeless lives, it would be here. But that hope is not realized. Every day I get to listen to people describing problems that would seem overwrought if they were in a novel, and made up if this was a think piece of fragmentation of American society. A perfectly average patient will be a 70-year-old woman who used to live somewhere else, but moved here a few years ago after her husband died in order to be closer to family. She has some medical condition or other that prevents her from driving or walking around much, and the family she wanted to be closer to have their own issues. So she has no friends within 500 miles and never leaves her house except to go to the doctor's appointments. She has one son who is in jail, one daughter who's married to a drug addict. She had one grandchild, her only remaining joy in the world. But her drug addict son-in-law uses access to him as a bargaining chip to make her give him money from her rapidly dwindling retirement account so he can buy drugs. When she can't cough up enough quickly enough, he bans her from visiting or talking to the grandchild. Plus, he tells the grandchild it's her fault. Her retirement savings are rapidly running out, and she has no idea what she will do when they're gone. Probably end up on the street. Also, her dog just died. Okay, Sam, there's no religion in this story, okay? None of this can really be attributed to this supernatural being that you're so terribly afraid of, but this is normal. And Scott Alexander is writing from an affluent, one of the wealthiest places, best places to live in all of human history, and it is insufficient. Now, do you have a hard time figuring out why people become religious? Why people make up their own religions? And then he goes into another one. And then he does a little survey. 1% of people are in prison. 2% of people are on probation. 1% of people in a nursing home. 2% with dementia. 20% with chronic pain. 7% with depression. 2% have cognitively disabled. 1% have schizophrenia. 20% on food stamps. 1% are wheelchair bound. 7% alcoholic. Nowhere on this list is anyone suffering from a religious condition. They are all suffering from the kinds of conditions that are normal to life in this world. That is the challenge, Sam. Is it any wonder why people get religions? So then he runs the script that he talks about. Out of any 20 people, chronic pain, alcoholic, chronic pain, no problems. But bear in mind, they see plenty of these people with no problems because their problems are their son-in-law is an alcoholic, or they're bitter against what's happened to their mother, or this is what psychologists deal with all the time, and they sit in a room and deal with people all the time. And this is the same thing that pastors deal with, because you see someone on the street and they look fine, they have income, they have food, they have housing. All of this stuff is set. They might even be wealthy. And if you listen to them and you open the door just a little bit to give them an invitation to complain, whoosh, in it comes. This is when I have too many tabs open.
And permanent happiness.
So you asked me, you put me on the spot a while back.
But
asking
let me
me-
just
Yep,
add my answer to this. I
Yeah.
just think there's the recipe for a good life, or at least a minimal recipe for a good life. It's not that this is all that's entailed, but this is certainly necessary, if not sufficient, is to live a life that is increasingly motivated by love.
Where's this coming from?
And guided by reason.
This has, okay, now in terms of my marching through the Vancouver lectures, it's right at this point that I was going to pause and say, okay, Sam, well, let's hear it again. This is Sam's, used to be well-being. So when you listen to Vancouver, it was well-being, well-being, well-being. Okay, well, now we're getting a little bit more definition.
Increasingly motive is to live a life that this is certainly necessary, if not sufficient, is to live a life that is increasingly motivated by love and guided by reason.
There's Sam's religion. He thinks.
Right? You can't go very far wrong if you are motivated by love and guided by reason. Right?
Motivated by love, guided by reason. Okay. Is this natural or is this supernatural?
And the problem is that...
Well,
ooh, let's clap. Jordan's going to have something to say to this.
okay. Well, the first thing I would say about that is, to me, that's a recapitulation of the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is that you should. That is, to me, that's a recapitulation of the Judeo-Christian ethic.
Now, what's interesting, if you listen to these things, Sam has a very selective filter on what is attributable to the past. He gets really salty if you start talking about communists. No. You can't lay that at the door of atheism. But then he lays communism at the door of Augustine. And it's like, Sam, have you ever read any Augustine? Do you know what Augustine had to say about love and biblical interpretation and the law? Sam, do you understand? So anything bad is attributable to a religion. Anything good is attributable to reason. That same Harris.
Which is that you should be guided by love and use well, the first thing I would say about that is, to me, that's a recapitulation of the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is that you should be guided by love and use logos to serve that.
Except you got to read the fine print on reason.
No, well, I didn't say reason. I said logos, because that's something that's deeper than reason.
There's the Jesus smuggling.
Yes, exactly. Well, yes, definitely.
I said it would happen.
Okay, so, but so look, I've been trying to. Part of the reason that I'm doing.
Now we're going to get Jordan Peterson's sermon.
What I'm doing is to try to address the void, let's say, and
Now bear in mind, Jordan Peterson, what void is he talking about? This is, again, if Jordan Peterson's life project is maps of meaning, his mission is to address the void. Is it a mistake that he's a clinical psychologist and he sits and listens to the void in people's lives? And so on one hand, as a clinical psychologist, now remember, he was a clinical psychologist, he was a lecturer, and he was doing experimental work, but in his role as a clinical psychologist, he's sitting and listening to the void all the time, and he listens and listens and listens and listens. And at the same time, he's in mythology, he's trying to work through this world, and that drives him into, remember, he a little bit of Christian formation in his youth in a mainline Cold War Canadian church, but he abandons that. He still doesn't go to church. He drives all the way down, and how can I fill the void? Because every time I sit with a patient in my room, I hear the void. And well, what is Jordan Peterson doing right now on a large scale? He's filling the void. Why is he traveling around every night in a new town, in another venue, 2,000 or 3,000 people to ramble at? He's filling the void. This is what Jordan Peterson is doing.
I suspect that many of you are actually here because you would like to have the void addressed. And so the way it looks to...
You can hear Morpheus in The Matrix talking about this.
Me is something like this, and this is what I've derived in part from my studies of religious tradition. So I could say that at the beginning of Genesis, for example, there's a proposition that it's truthful speech that generates habitable order from chaotic potential. That seems to me to be the fundamental narrative, and I do believe there's something dead accurate and real about that, because we do generate the world as a consequence of our communicative effort. And then there's a second proposition, which is that the world that we generate from the chaos of potential is habitable to the degree that the communication that we engage in is truthful. And that's why God, who uses the logos at the beginning of time to generate the world.
And what he's doing here is he's putting his whole thing into a nutshell.
Is able to say that his creation is good. The proposition is the world you bring into being through truthful speech is good. And that's the image of God that's implanted in man and woman. And there's a grandeur about that idea. And you think, well, you don't need the grandeur because it's just a fiction. It's like, just wait a second here. It's not just a fiction unless you don't believe that in some manner you partake in the creation of the world and that you have an ultimate responsibility that might well be described as divine to participate in that process properly, truthfully, and with love. And there's every reason to think that that's an elevated ideal so high that it's worthy of conceptualizing as divine, and also to presume that it represents some fundamental metaphysical reality. And that's a lot more powerful than you need to be good.
Yes.
Right there. He spoke his heart. He preached his sermon as his former friend and colleague Bernie said when Jordan Peterson was out looking for a church he could buy in Toronto. This is the sermon Jordan Peterson wants to preach. Listen to his voice. Listen to his passion. He is speaking his core here. This is who he is. This is the meaning of life. This is how to save the world.
That in some manner you partake in the creation of the world and that you have an ultimate responsibility that might well be described as divine to participate in that process properly, truthfully, and with love. And there's every reason to think that that's an elevated ideal so high that it's worthy of conceptualizing as divine, and also to presume that it represents some fundamental metaphysical reality.
The only problem with it is his sermon is, you need almost a PhD to understand his sermon, but this is his heart. And Sam is unmoved.
And that's a lot more powerful than you need to be good.
Yes, but the problem here...
And when he says it's a lot more powerful than you need to be good, you can hear him critiquing. You hear him, he's almost channeling the 12-year-old in the mainline United Church at Canada in northern Alberta, hearing the message. What did he get out of church? You need to be good. What do we find now? Now, the social justice thing is making its way. It's become the new civil religion in North America, and it's making its way through the churches. And when I listen to social justice sermons, what do the sermons all boil down to? You need to be good. Okay. But what they don't understand is that Christianity answers the question, I need to be good. What if I'm not? What if I can't? What if I am the Auschwitz guard? What if that happened to me? What if that's me? Read Corrie ten Boom's The Hiding Place. Get to the end of the book where she was a Christian. She hid Jews because she was a Christian. And she went to the same prison camps of the Jews because she hid them, because she was a Christian, and she's reliving the Christian story. She goes into the underworld, and her sister dies in the concentration camp, and she comes out of it, and she's bearing the scars of the death of her sister. But then she goes on the road to tell her story, and when she goes to Germany to preach, a guard comes up to her, a former guard that was in her camp, a former guard that she knows is directly responsible for the death of his sister, and he has the nerve to come up to her after the message and to say, I feel so liberated by the love of Jesus. Thank you for preaching. And Corrie ten Boom now has a crisis, because talking about the love of Jesus has been easy. But now she has to, what is she going to say to this prison guard who killed her sister? Read the passage. Get the book. Read the book. Read the passage. They're looking for a way to motivate people. Basically, read the passage.
Here, Jordan, is that I could do exactly what you just did with Buddhism or Hinduism, and it is just as grand and just as deep.
What does Sam think Jordan just did? I'd really love to know that, because now he's saying you could do this exact same thing with Hinduism and Buddhism. He's saying, okay, all religions are the same. That's what he keeps saying. They're all the same. And then in a minute, he's going to say Hinduism and Buddhism are totally different.
And just as anchored to the first-person experience of contemplatives who've taken that as far as they could take it. People,
well, then
monastics.
I would say, Sam, you should do that and see how people respond to it.
Well, no, because I...
Yes,
because,
seriously.
No, because...
And Jordan Peterson saying, okay, if you can do what I'm doing and helping people fill the hole, fill it, please, because there's more void that needs to be filled. And Sam's, no.
I see the end of the game. It doesn't arrive where I want to get to, where we need to get to, because it would be to different effect. There are different claims ultimately about the status of truth and good and evil, and about the beginning of the world and the fate of a human consciousness after death. They're completely irreconcilable worldviews.
I also don't think
you cannot square. If there are Hindus in the audience, they believe something that is totally irreconcilable to what Christians believe.
I don't think that you can offer, pardon me, a watered-down version of Buddhism as a consequence of psychedelic experience, as acceptable and credible alternative to the power of the fundamental founding myths of the Western culture.
Yeah,
and if you think you can, then you should try.
I'm trying. Well, I'm not trying that, but that's not.
That's my favorite point in the whole video. And again, if you're listening on the podcast, you might want to see the video. We're at minute 129:50, where Peterson gives this little fascinating little head shake. I'll bring it back.
Not what I'm
Founding myths of the Western culture.
Yeah,
and if you think you can, then you should try.
I'm trying. Well, I'm not trying that, but that's not. That's not what I do. First of all, just to get my biography straight, it's not just the psychedelic experience.
I know.
Yes,
and I'm also not making light of the psychedelic experience.
Listen, to take this, we're having most of this conversation on the side of wherein it seems reasonable to worry about the fate of civilization, right? We could have started at a very different point with just the nature of consciousness. Right, for our first person encounter.
I don't think Sam has anything here to go on at all. He's an individualist, and this will become, I think, most exposed when a little bit later he starts having to try to talk about love.
With being itself, right? All of us wake up each morning. We are thrust from a condition of deep sleep, which we seem to know nothing about. And we just got pushed through a veil of dreams into this apparently solid reality that we call the world, and we're engaging one another in this space of just consciousness and its contents, and we're trying to make sense of it. And science is the best language game we play, I would argue.
The funny thing about Harris is that I never know which Harris shows up, because sometimes it's the fact, and then sometimes it's the it's consciousness.
Trying to make truly rigorous sense of it, but it doesn't exhaust all the language games we play. We play others that are also fact-based. We talk about what happened historically before we arrived here. We talk about facts as we can understand them that we just didn't witness, but others did, and we call that journalism, right? So we're trying to have a fact-based discussion.
We used to call that journalism.
Yes, it's getting harder and harder to discern what's actually going on now, but we are thrust into this condition of being our apparent selves moment by moment, and we notice the difference between happiness and suffering, right? And this is not merely sensory. It's not merely that, I don't like the feeling of a hot stove, and I do like a warm bath. It's ideas, the ways of thinking about ourselves and the world can open the door or close the door to various states of happiness and suffering. And religion leverages that. The difference between believing that your dead child is in heaven with Jesus and not being able to believe that is enormous.
Okay. Keep this in mind when we start talking about love, because I don't know. Does Sam Harris know people? Does he work with people? Does he sit with people when they are in pain? Pastors do this. Clinical psychologists do this. And what you learn as a pastor or clinical psychologist is that on one hand, your motivation is to help people feel better. But on the other hand, you know that if you do this in a facile, in a cheap, in a shallow, in an insufficient way, you're not helping them. You need something deep. You need something true. Sometimes you need to tell someone something that they don't want to hear, but you need to be able to bank on the fact that maybe 5, 10, 15 years from now, they will think back and say it was my own delusion that kept me from knowing it.
Right?
I want to ask a specific, though. You've expended a certain amount of reputational energy and much more on the jihadists. In your battles, shall we say there, how much allyship, to use a very voguish term, have you found from fellow secular, rational people who want to love and reason like you?
Now, I've listened to this question a few times now, because I've listened to this video about 4 times this morning, because trying to get my head around it. This is an interesting question. Basically, he's asking the question about, okay, so Sam, you're over here you're on the left politically, you're on the left in terms of giving it up and being hostile towards Christianity. A lot of those other people on the left soft sell Islam, and they don't want to criticize Islam, and they want their intersectionality to embrace Islam. And the thing about Sam has been that Sam has been strident about my anti-religion is going to include Islam. I don't know if it's going to include Hinduism and Buddhism, but at least Sam's stalwartly, consistently against at least the Abrahamic religions, because that's where he sees issues about having an inspired text. And again, this question about the inspired text is something I really want to get into, because whereas Sam's critique affects certain groups, definitely Muslims, definitely Mormons. Mormonism is a little bit different because of how they view prophecy. Certain Christian groups, I don't know that he's fair to the broadest Christian traditions that include my own, that include Roman Catholics, that include Orthodox. I think he basically strawmans them with his take on the Bible. But so here basically Doug Murray is saying, okay, Sam, you've been out there preaching your anti-religious gospel, and you've had a strident critique against Islam. Why hasn't the left rallied around you? People who are atheists, why haven't they rallied around you to support you in your condemnation of Islam, as they all are in their criticism of Christianity in their own culture?
Well, that is a leading question, isn't it?
I've got fingers if you need more.
Yeah. No, your fingers are safe. No, unfortunately, but this is a problem of, I wouldn't ascribe this to, well, the allies you can easily find among deeply religious Christians, say, are there for the wrong reasons.
Okay. Now, again, pay attention to what this conversation is. Now, these conversations are nested because we're going to get back to the big one. But here in this, Douglas says, why aren't there more people on the left who have given up Christianity, are secularists, are on the political left, who hate Donald Trump? And if you listen to Sam Harris, he makes no mistake how he feels about Donald Trump. Why aren't there more people with you criticizing Islam? And Sam Harris is saying, well, there are actually a lot of religious people, the kind of people I'm pushing against, who in some strange ways are allies with me in this, but they're allies with me for the wrong reasons.
Right. I mean, so I can find, I can
Well,
go
not
Are there
surely
wrong
not all
reasons
of
for
them.
that?
Well, no, they're
Wrong reasons.
They're there for the wrong. Well, they see the problem clearly for the wrong reasons. So, for instance, I meet secular scientist types, anthropologists, say, who are so far from knowing what it's like to believe in revelation that they don't believe anyone else does.
Oh.
Right. So when you tell them that members of ISIS really believe that if you die in the right circumstances, you get 72 virgins, and you're in, surrounded by rivers of milk and honey and all the rest. If you go into the ivory tower, you meet people who don't believe that anyone believes that stuff. But if you go into a megachurch, they know people believe that stuff because they believe their own dogmas. Right.
So in other words, many on the left are simply dismissive of religion and see it as juvenile. Now this is interesting because part of the career atheists, the celebrity atheists, part of their critique is always religion is juvenile. Well, okay. So is it juvenile and a monster, or is it just juvenile?
Right. That's what it's like to be effortlessly right for not especially good reasons. The fact that you believe a book was written by God, and therefore it's trivially easy for you to understand that someone else believes that, but they just have the wrong book. That's not the rational basis for understanding our circumstance that we're looking for.
I'm not saying whether one is right and one is wrong, but one seems to have more commitment in that. And in one battle you're fighting, commitment may be important.
Yeah.
So in other words, the Christians that are the people, the Christians that look at Islam as a serious problem are committed. Now, this gets then into the larger question that Jordan Peterson started with about why can't the atheists build cohesive, why can't they really build a cohesive, powerful tribe like we've seen religious people do? And again, if you listen to Jonathan Haidt will say, what do you need in order to build a tribe? Well, you need that pole to circle around, and Jonathan Haidt has that in his criticism of the rationalists. You need poetry, you need stories, you need iconography, you need mythos. People need mythos in order to tribe up to meet a threat. And Douglas Murray is saying, okay, Sam, and remember, this is a nested conversation. Okay, Sam, you're trying to fight this battle against ISIS and Islam, and we know you're out there making all kinds of noise about that. And you've got all these inconvenient allies who are on the same page as you, but they are exactly the kind of people that you are dismissing and saying are the problem of the world. In other words, you're not falling well into the tribes, and that's why you don't need to borrow any of Douglas Murray's fingers to count your allies. And underneath this, underneath the point that Douglas Murray is making, remember, I'm a preacher. This is what I do for a living. I explain things. I explain the Bible. So I listen and then I read and I try to explain things so that, slow things down so that we can understand. Douglas Murray is saying, Sam, your position has a real problem, and we have plenty of evidence to that problem. And it's the same point that Melanie Brewster is making, that as you keep saying, atheism is nothing but the absence of religion. It's hard to build a tribe in a vacuum. Everyone suffocates. And so I've told the story, I think, a couple of times. People will grab whatever totem, whatever idol. John Calvin says our hearts are idol factories. And this is the point that Murray has been making. If you take out a big, powerful mythos, you leave a void, and that void has ramifications all the way down in a person's life. And many of those people who are leaving the Sam Harris tribe and wandering over to the Jordan Peterson tribe are doing so because that void has remained in their heart, and now they are asking, and they are coming to me, and they are saying, Paul Vanderklay, can you help me fill the void? And I say, yeah, I can show you Jesus. But they say, yeah, but I'm not ready for Jesus. And I say, you're gonna have to take the leap. If you're gonna fill the void. And they say, well, I'm scared and I don't want to lose my rationality. I say, okay, I don't believe Jesus is calling you to check your brain at the door. And that's part of the reason I make these videos, because whereas, yeah, you read the comment section, there are plenty of people will comment on me. I don't want you to leave your brain at the door. I want you to bring your brain. I believe God gave you a brain to use it for a reason. But the void has to be filled. And what Douglas Murray is pointing out, Sam, you're kind of alone, Sam. And now Sam has a following and so on and so forth, but many people fill the void, and many people have problems.
Yeah,
and
indeed.
there may be many reasons why the people who deeply want to love and be rational are absolutely no damn use in that fight, because they want to preserve their happiness a bit longer, preserve their comfort a bit longer, cannot understand people who genuinely come from a fundamentalist standpoint.
Yeah.
And what Murray is saying here, okay, Sam, you want to be about well-being. Those who are individually, idiosyncratically, solely committed to their own well-being of their conscious self in this moment are no good in a fight. What does that mean? They don't survive. What does that mean? It might very well be that atheism is, in terms of a tribe, a terminal disease, which is why you don't find very many throughout history. And Sam Harris keeps wanting to say, well, we've overcome that. We've gotten beyond it. Well, no one told Darwin, because it may very well be, well, look at the West. We don't have as many children. We don't have as many convictions. And with Douglas Murray, much more in terms of being in Europe on the fringe of this, as opposed to us in North America, that, all our immigrants coming up from the South are Christians for the most part. They're Catholics. They're Roman Catholics. They're not dealing with Islam. And Doug Murray is looking at this and saying, Europe has to mobilize and deal with this. But atheism doesn't give them anything to mobilize around. And maybe I'll have a conversation with Roland about this, or someone else from the Netherlands, because this is a big issue in the Netherlands. This is a big issue in Europe. And a lot of people say Europe is going to become Islamic. And the irony is that Doug Murray is telling Sam Harris, you're trying to fight this brand of Islamic fundamentalism, and your allies are not your allies because they're in mega churches singing love songs to Jesus. And in the meantime, the people that are on your side, their house is being ransacked. And what if England becomes Islamist? And Sam, whereas nice Christians like Paul Vanderklay are paying attention to you, a lot of radical Muslims will treat you in a wholly different way. Why? Well, maybe it's because the one that we believe rose from the dead commanded us to love our enemies. And so what that means is I have to love Sam Harris. And maybe what that means is I'm going to have to ask for some forgiveness for some of the things I've said in these videos about Sam Harris. Because it's really hard to, on one hand, be honest and clear, but on the other hand, to be loving. There's Christianity. Love is not easy. We're going to get back to love in this conversation.
And there's also other, to steelman their case for a moment, it is understandable to be sensitive to and guilty about the history of colonialism and the reality of racism, and to be so committed.
He's steelmanning the left here, by the way. He's not steelmanning the big box Christianity.
To tolerance as your master virtue, that you're tempted to tolerate intolerance and not recognize it to be cowardice, which in fact it is.
Making tolerance your core value is much different than making truth your core value.
Yes.
Which is an interesting thing, because, and perhaps this is one of the places where you and the fundamentalist radical leftists, let's say, differ, is that the core value that's emerging there is definitely one of tolerance, whereas the core value that you espouse is one of truth. And truth and tolerance are not the same thing.
Yes,
and so it might also,
Nor is the pursuit of
Amen, he says.
truth and the belief that as a result truth can be found, that it's not a single thing on its own, you just pursue it as a hobby. It's just something you do, but that you believe that at the end of it there is a truth to be found.
So here you have how we're going to categorize Peterson. There's a huge question. How to categorize Douglas Murray? I know a lot less about him, so in that sense it's easier. Is he post-Christian? But what he's not given up is the mission for truth. And but
Douglas, what do you fear is the case here? If there were more people like me in the West, right? Well, maybe I'm the outlier here. I'm somehow infected by this overweening commitment to truth and rationality and science, and yet I'm still motivated to worry about jihad. But you're worried that there are many people like me who are oblivious to the problem.
Why are you worried about it when so many other people who are hypothetically, this is the question you asked, why are you so worried about when there's so many people who are hypothetically like you that don't seem to be worried about it? I mean, maybe you're wrong and you shouldn't be worried about it, although Douglas is obviously worried about it too.
One answer is a possibility, it's my worry at any rate, that we may be living in an era when we are discovering that the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment's values never went very wide and didn't go terribly deep. And this is a very painful realization to make. But not only do we go all around the world and discover that, we find that at home. The roots turn out not to have gone very deep in even this society. And that's a problem.
In other words, he's saying, the Enlightenment as a religion wasn't viral enough. And the fear is, to piggyback on this isn't what he's saying, but the fear is, and I think this is exactly Jordan Peterson's critique of Sam Harris, the Enlightenment doesn't have the mythos to go viral and to get into people's emotional souls. And what that means is that a well-formed, and Jordan Peterson speak, a well-formed religion as opposed to an ideology is a much better rounded thing. And over time, what well-formed religions have demonstrated the capacity to is to implant itself in the spectrum of human temperaments, the spectrum of human personalities. So in other words, in a well-formed religion, you can have the stuff that makes your heart sing, and you can have the stuff that feeds your head, and you can have, well, and to me this gets to the, again, Jordan Peterson talks about it in terms of a multi-factor analysis, which is what he did in the Sacramento meeting when he talked about the resurrection. I did tape it in my cell phone, and I'm tempted to play it. I don't know. Peterson isn't releasing recordings of these things, but he did say it publicly, so I don't know how I feel about that. But again, this is why I believe in the literal bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because that which is most true has to be most true at every level and has to become instantiated at every level. In other words, for Jesus' resurrection not to have been bodily leaves the Christian religion out to lunch. I don't think you can just skim the cream off the top and say, no, I'm going to take a bunch of these things from Christianity, but no, because if Christianity is true enough that I can sit down and talk to someone grieving the loss of a loved one and say, you will see them again. You won't just talk to them. You won't just feel them in their spirit. They don't just live in your heart. You will touch their flesh. Isn't that what our hearts long for? Isn't this what we desire? But now we have the challenge. Well, how can I believe that? How can I live into this world? Well, you know what? It takes worship. It takes commitment. It takes donating your money. It takes donating your time. It takes all the things that young people understand when they go to the Star Wars movie and they dress up like their favorite character. It means living into the fandom. It means committing your life to it if you want to believe it. But then you say, well, what if I go down a rabbit trail and start believing a wrong thing? And I would say, that's a real concern. But what other choice do you have? And this again is where we saved by grace through faith. This is where we say, okay, Lord, I don't finally save myself by my capacity to believe this, but I trust in you. And the shape of my life is living out that trust. And believe you me, I am a lousy Christian in many, many ways because so often I don't trust Jesus. Right now we're working on our budget in the church and we're like 30,000 short for the next year, and it's like, and I know that of that 30,000, a lot of that's going to come out of my salary, and so then I have to ask myself, do I trust him? If I trust him with my death, do I trust him with my life? Do I finally believe that Jesus is sufficient to save me in every way I can be saved? To save me body and soul and in life and in death? I don't believe it strongly enough. Well, what is it going to take? What do I need to do, not to earn that, but to do to reinforce the elephant and the rider to believe in this thing? That's my question. That's my challenge. And the church and worship and accountability and being part of a body and not cutting and running when doubts get too high. That's part of it. So
it is a problem, but hence my commitment to making them deeper.
And to reiterate the point, I'd be very happy if it was entirely Sam Harris's all the way down.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay? I'd have no problem with that. It's just that underneath Sam Harris, It's hell.
and I had to listen to this a few times to kind of understand what Douglas Murray was saying. And some of you say, "Oh, I got it the first time, so you're smarter than me." There you go, Bing, star. But maybe that's why I'm a pastor, because it takes me a little while to figure things out, and I got to process it through, and that helps me then explain it, hopefully. But what Murray is saying is that the Enlightenment only got so far, and Sam is saying, "Well, I'm an evangelist for the Enlightenment." And so Murray says, "Great, I wish there were more of you, but what the Enlightenment seemed to do is hollow things out, and it's being filled with all kinds of ideologies and made-up religions." And just like Jordan Peterson said earlier, people are defaulting to their skin color and their gender and their sexuality and their nationalism. They're defaulting to all of the other easy, off-the-shelf religious things that have ready-made symbols, like nationalism. And they're defaulting to all of this because the Enlightenment hollowed it out. And so Peterson and Doug Murray are saying to Sam Harris, "Okay, you're being an evangelist for the Enlightenment." And Doug Murray is saying, "Okay, Sam, well, if they were all like you, I'd be okay. But in your atheism evangelism, you are continuing the hollowing thing, but you're not really addressing the void." And in a sense, Sam Harris, therefore, is the epitome of that, because Sam Harris himself, how did he fill the void? Psychedelics, meditation, but as Jordan Peterson said earlier, it's a watered-down Buddhism. It's not a Buddhism that if you go to Tibet or to China or to Japan, that someone would look at and esteem. They'd say, "Yeah, you Western Buddhists." And you see this all over. Go ahead and Google how Indians feel about American yoga. These are live conversations that are out there, because a lot of the people from the East look at their imagined allies in the West and say, you're just like the teenage girl who doesn't believe anything, has this nice little gold cross, and says, "Well, I believe in Jesus, and I believe," and then it just rattles off all kinds of non sequitur beliefs that are vaguely associated much more with what Hollywood has done with religion than what any coherent religious system has ever done. And in a sense, that's what's happening.
Well, I'm also curious.
You know me too well.
I'm curious about something that you said.
Yeah, that has to be very carefully edited on YouTube.
I hope I was faithful to it.
In the metaphysic that you outlined, rationality in the service of love, this is an interesting. I'm not sure you get away with that, because, is it rationality or is it love? Because I don't understand the place in your conceptual system for love, given your emphasis on rationality as the ethic as the mechanism of ethics. So I would say, to the degree that I smuggle in Jesus, which, by the way, isn't accidental in some sense, and I'm fully conscious when I'm doing it, you smuggle in love, and it essentially plays the same role.
Well, no, love is an experienced reality. I mean, love is a state of consciousness. It's a state.
And this is where I think we really see the poverty of Sam's position.
And I wouldn't ultimately.
Is it a fact?
Well, it's a fact that one can experience it or not. To a very degree.
It's a fact that one can experience it or not, just like, well, you've just hollowed out your whole project about facts. You just gave it up, and you don't even know you gave it up. Jordan Peterson knows you gave it up.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing.
No, it is. I mean, there are.
It's a fact that you can experience something, but the thing that you're experiencing is, there's also the thing that.
Go ahead and look at rationality rules. Go ahead and understand a fact is a thing, whether I know it or not. That's their main point. This objective, monarchical view of the world that they say they have access to. That's the point. And now, when he gets to the center of his schema, well, I thought it was well-being. Now it's love. Love is a fact? I don't know how your system has capacity for that. And Peterson's about to go off on it.
That you're experiencing as a fact.
Well, no, there are facts about the range of human experiences. I mean, I think, and not even just human, just conscious experiences. That if we can build computers that can feel love.
Stop! We don't even know what it means for another human being to feel love, but we have an idea that they feel love because we feel love. Please tell me how you could build a computer that you would know would feel love. Please tell me how you could build a computer that you would know would feel anything. This is the fact guy. I can't believe he just said that.
And that's not inconceivable, and we'll either succeed in doing that or not. But consciousness admits of a range of experiences, and love is one of the best on offer. It's not the only one we care about, but it's the one that anchors
So is it the top or not the top?
us to a positive commitment to the well-being of other conscious systems. And
But it's not a.
But the crucial thing is
it's not a fact. I agree with you.
It is a fact that loving someone.
If you want to go through all the 4 lectures, that's 8 hours plus. Count how many times Jordan Peterson will say to Sam Harris, "That's not a fact." For all kinds of things that Jordan Peterson knows, if you're not going to have a void, you need these things. And Sam Harris says, that is a fact. So on one hand, Sam Harris wants to say it's facts, 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 but then anything can be a fact for Sam Harris if he needs it.
Entails their love and its counterfeits, right? People can confuse, romantic, attachment or lust with love, right? So I mean,
and a few minutes ago, what you said was necessary to talk to someone who has just lost their son. Please tell me what love requires.
Buddhists are especially good at differentiating these various states of consciousness, and
for him, Hinduism and Buddhism seem like a tree that he scurries under whenever he has an answer he can't answer, which is ironic because usually it's waving the flag of rationality, but now he scurries under the tree of Buddhism and Hinduism.
This true pleasure, mental pleasure in the company of another that is colored by a commitment to their well-being, a wanting them to be happy, a wanting to have their hopes realized, a non-zero-sum commitment or sense of your entanglement with them. And you can see your failures to love. I mean, you can be with people who you think you love. I'm with my best friend, say, and I just find out something fantastic has happened for him, let's say in his career, and I feel a moment of envy, say. Well, then you see, just how much do you love this person if your first reaction to something good happening to them is you feel poorer for it, right?
That's the Cain and Abel story.
Exactly. So these are all kinds of defects you can witness in your own mind. And yes, you pay enough attention to what it's like to be you. The full horror show of an almost biblical unwinding of all possibility is available.
Yes. And once misery, deliverance, gratitude, misery, deliverance, gratitude, misery, deliverance, gratitude. Once you realize how miserable you are, and once you realize how short your life is, and once you realize that you've done things that you cannot undo, and you have hurt people in ways that cannot be undone, where do you go with that? Who can help you? You need a savior bigger than yourself.
And you add psychedelics to that cocktail, and it gets even more vivid. But
so are you saying that
this is
your
claim
that that's a
it is a fact. These are facts about the human mind, and it is also factual to say that it is possible.
Are these facts any different from any other assertion? Because what he's basically said, that all assertions are facts. Well, you can turn an assertion into a fact because it's a fact that Sam asserted it. So now it's a fact. So, but then you take the fact and you bring it over to your other system and say, it's only facts. Well, once I assert it, I've made it a fact. So now it's a fact.
Possible to navigate in this space. It is possible to design institutions and social systems and ethical commitments that help us navigate in this space.
But this is where we started the question. This is how we started this range of the conversation, because Jordan Peterson said the atheists have had very little success creating the kinds of things that would enable them to create cohesive communities that fill the void. And now Sam Harris is just asserting that this is what we can do, but it hasn't been done.
It's not that we all have to get up every morning naked and try to rebuild civilization and all of human wisdom for ourselves each day. We inherit the most useful tools.
It's like we've spent 8 hours making a point and he gives it away, but he doesn't know he gives it away. It's kind of like, I fired him because of the Russian thing. Okay.
You don't have to figure this all out for yourself. And my appeal to you is that we should want to use...
Because the love thing, Peterson is right. You just ripped that off from Jesus. 2 commandments I give you. Summarize the law and the prophets. Love the Lord your God. We can't do that because you're Sam Harris. Love your neighbor as yourself. I'll take that one. There you go. So your secularism is Christianity demythified. That's what it is. It's what it's always been. It's what Jordan Peterson is telling you it's been. That's your whole system, Sam. Christianity demythified. And what Peterson is saying is the myth isn't going to go unnoticed. Its absence will be felt. It creates a void, and this is why, Doug Harris says, this is why Europe is crumbling. That void is needed to mobilize people to stand, to have something, to, as C.S. Lewis said, to not be men without chests. Read The Abolition of Man. Please read The Abolition of Man.
All the best tools available without hamstringing ourselves by this notion that certain tools...
Your tools have foundations.
Must be the best for all time, or certain books must be read on every page with equal diligence because this book came from the creator of the universe.
Jefferson's Bible never caught on.
When we're reading Marcus Aurelius, if he gets something catastrophically wrong on page 17, we say, well, what the hell? He lived 2,000 years ago. There's no way he knew everything, right?
And this exactly is the point, because how can you be freed from your own biases? How can you be freed from the narrowness of your own idiosyncratic life, of your 80 years, of your one single person? And Jordan Peterson's project says, we have been built up, these structures, these hard and soft structures from below have been built into us, and we need these. These are our a priori filter that we use to appropriate facts, and we need all of this. And Sam Harris says, I will stand in judgment over anything I read. I want this, I don't want this. Well, you know what? You're going to be as shallow as the girl at the mall, because that's what she does.
Right? And we turn the page.
Okay,
right?
so
we can't do that with the Bible.
Poor Peterson.
The mythological representation of that. So there's an ancient
He doesn't want a mythological representation of that. That's his point.
idea, a very ancient idea, that when you face the void, what you do is confront it and leap into it. And what you discover at the bottom is a beast, and inside that beast you discover your father lying dead, and then you reanimate your father and you bring him back to the surface, and that's the means of dealing with the void.
He doesn't want a mythological representation of it. That's his point. He doesn't want mythology, and he says we don't need it. And he's about to demonstrate that again.
Right? And so in essence, in some sense, that's just what you said. You said that
Except that, again, there's something confabulatory about that, because you can do I could change the valence of virtually every word you use there, and it would also sound profound and true. I could.
And right here, I think we see something key about Harris, is that everything gets boiled down to, in Christianity, there's something that we call sacramentalism. And it's the idea that, for example, when I, as a Protestant pastor, say, this is my body. Now, I don't, this gets into the war of the Reformation, but what I don't mean when I say this is my body, that if you take that bread and you take it to a lab, you find human genetic material from the 1st century AD. That's not what I'm saying. But that, and I'm also not a Zwinglian, so I'm a Calvinist. What Calvinists say is that Christ is spiritually, I know it's a word that fudges, you got to be careful with it. Christ is spiritually present in the body and in the body and the drink, in the sacrament. He's spiritually present, and he feeds our spirits with his life. That's what the sacrament means. And in order to do that, what you have to do is have this mythic imagination that says that there's a connection between what we do here and other things. And those are real connections. And the context of these things matters. So and this is what, well, I'll just let it play because this is where they're going to go. Sam Harris has no idea of sacramentality, partly because the project of the Enlightenment was to get rid of sacramentality. Now, part of that is due to the Reformation, because the Reformation was trying to work on this and to say, and so you've got transubstantiation in the Roman Catholic, consubstantiation with the Lutherans, the Calvinists with the real spiritual presence of Christ in the sacrament, and then the Zwinglians, it's a symbol. And the Calvinists didn't want to say it's merely a symbol, because what we're trying to get at is the idea, which has been lost in the Enlightenment, that stuff has connections to deeper things. And this is the line between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, that Jordan Peterson somehow believes he's trying to get at some kind of sacramentality, and Sam Harris is simply dismissing it.
Swap father for mother, and I could swap void for mountaintop, and it could be the same seemingly archetypal journey, and someone could make sense of it.
It's not that easy, Sam. Like, that's the same
it's
thing.
It's damn easy. I've done it with a cookbook.
But look, if it's that easy, then you can write.
And the reason Sam thinks he's done it is because he said, well, I had the feels. I had the feels from it, so I swapped it out and I could still produce that feeling. Well, again, that's Sam Harris's metric. If I can feel it in my little conscious bubble, that's as real as it can be. And Jordan Peterson is saying, could there be a real world out there?
Great novels.
No,
and you can tell great stories.
Well,
if it's that easy, it's not that easy to
involved.
write a great story. So these things can't be swapped out with ease. And there is a reason that it's your father that you rescue from the belly of the beast and not your mother in those sorts of situations.
Yeah,
and you wonder why Jordan Peterson kvetched at pronouns? There's a reason. It goes deep. He's a sacramentalist.
It is akin to...
Again, I give you Buddhism and Hinduism that have completely...
He runs back under the tree.
Different iconographies and mythologies, and
well, they're different
at
some levels, but no.
But the point, and we started out Vancouver 1 saying it's not arbitrary, and what Sam Harris keeps saying here is it's arbitrary.
Not at all. It's like languages. They're different at some levels and not at all.
They're crucially opposite in many of these cases. I'm just saying that this kind of reading meaning into story there's a reason why it's not science. Because it.
And now we're back at Harris's materialism. There is no meaning in story. It has to be read in. Meaning is a product of the brain. Again, read C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man, because C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man, is entirely about this.
It is, in some basic sense, unfalsifiable. There's nothing you and I can do for the rest of our lives to be
there-
sure that the
look,
mother isn't at the
is
bottom
it
of that
possible-
void and it's really the
Is it
father.
possible to develop a factual approach to the analysis of literature?
Well, yes, on its own
And again, C.S. Lewis, he was an English scholar. This is the point of his book.
terms. You can say, well, but that extends to things like it is a fact that Hamlet was the Prince of Denmark and not
No,
the
I meant
king.
in terms of the
Right.
meaning of literature.
Well, yeah, but you can make true and false claims, or more and less plausible claims about literature.
Well,
and
that's what I'm trying to do, is
or
to
its
make more
or its effects
plausible
on
claims.
you. But again, this is a very
Again, it's effects on you. There's Sam Harris. He's right there.
different game than what most religious people think is on offer.
Well, look, if you look at the domain of science, most scientists aren't very good at what they do. And if you look at the domain of religious thinking, most religious thinking people aren't very good at what they do, but that doesn't mean that the whole damn thing should be thrown out. There's gradations of religious revelation and wisdom.
But there's that word, because revelation, if revelation is something that we can all do.
And so right here, you can see the connection between sacramentality and revelation, that things in this world connect us to deeper things than merely the phenomenology.
You know, you, me, and Marcus Aurelius, right? That is a very different world than the world that Muslims think they're living in.
But you just said, Sam, that we have to go in. This is why I used the going down into the void to rescue your father metaphor. You just said that we have to, and you've said this before, and I know you believe it as well, that we have to go back into the past and find the wisdom that can help guide us, because we don't have to do this as if we're encountering everything for the first time. And that's exactly the idea of
So Peterson's been tracking. He heard Sam Harris give up the game. Now Sam Harris is running back the other way, and Peterson's calling him on it.
going into the void to rescue your father. That's how that is the eternal age-old medication for the confrontation of the void. And you said it yourself. And so I don't know which it is. It's like, do we have to go into the past to rescue what's best, given the understanding that there is something there worth rescuing, or not? Is it pure rationality and nothing else moving forward, unconstrained by convention?
It's just, again, it's I want our certainties, and I think we all.
I just don't think Sam Harris has thought any of this through.
Oh, in every other area of our lives, we agree about this effortlessly, right? If I'm pretending to be certain of something that you can sense I have no good reason to be certain about, you begin to mistrust me in every area. If it's in business, or if it's in sports, or if I told you I knew that France was going to win the World Cup and I was absolutely sure, and yet I magically didn't bet any money on it. I mean, these are conversations we can have about everything else, and yet on this topic of religion, people change the rules, right? And I'm just arguing that the rules should never, the rules by which we dole out
What you're saying is that you're living in different worlds.
our credence shouldn't change, and they don't change. And again, we shouldn't be misled by the duration of the past. I mean, this is the comparison of something like Scientology to Christianity is so invidious because we can practically meet L. Ron Hubbard, right? We've got film of him confabulating about galaxies that, ruled by overlords whose names he magically knew, right? We see the man behind the curtain. We don't see that with the Apostle Paul or anyone else who brought us the quote real religions.
Okay, time. What's the difference between the Apostle Paul and L. Ron Hubbard? Well, why don't you read a book on Manichaeism and read about Mani and read about the ideas that Mani had about these. Just read a book about Manichaeism. It's a wild ride, and if you read Manichaeism, something about Manichaeism, and then you read L. Ron Hubbard, you'll say, wow, these two guys really thought some crazy stuff. Peterson is making the point. He says there's a Darwinian exercise here that's going on, and the the bigger, the truer things last longer, okay? And so in a sense, that which survives in a Darwinian competition likely has more truth to it, all right? So Sam Harris is saying, oh, it's only time because we don't know the roots of the Apostle Paul isn't crazy like L. Ron Hubbard. But what the Apostle Paul wrote, go ahead and look at Tom Holland and N.T. Wright's conversation on Unbelievable a month and a half or so ago. Tom Holland isn't a Christian, but he's a historian. You fail to appreciate the contribution that the Apostle Paul made. Now, you might as well say, well, there's Sam Harris and there's Socrates. And, well, the only difference is that Socrates lived a long time ago. But if we knew Socrates, we would think he's Sam Harris. I don't think so. There's a reason Socrates has the valence, has the value that he does in our society, and it's not because he made noises. Here's the question. 200 years from now, will anybody care about Sam Harris? Will anybody care about Paul Vanderklay? Will anybody care about Jordan Peterson? We don't know. But 200 years from now, we'll say something.
And yet, it's always just been human beings doing this, right? And if you go back far enough, they were doing it in a situation that was completely uncontaminated by the kinds of concerns we have as scientists and secular rational people.
But the point that it's been useful to people for 2,000 years is testimony to something, which is something that Jordan Peterson has said numerous times, but no traction on Sam.
For evidence and consistency and a knowledge of the past. I mean, they had nothing they had no mechanism by which to record their observations.
No.
That isn't true. Last week I preached on Nahum. I'm preaching on Obadiah. We know from Mari, which is a city in Mesopotamia, that prophets were out there, and when someone would do a prophetic utterance, they would record it. Well, how would they record it? They didn't have paper. Well, go to a museum. You'll see these tiny little plate tablets with all these things like chicken marks in it. Well, what were those? That was how they recorded stuff. Now, you might not recognize it as recording, but there's receipts, there's bills, there's writings. They recorded this, and so prophets would make their prognostications, and they would write them down. And when one of them came true, they would say, we should look at that. Look at my sermon last week about Nate Silver. We do the same thing today. Sam Harris says, they didn't do any of that. Sam doesn't know any history. Read a little history, Sam.
Yeah, and
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yes.
Because first of all, I saw a sign saying 5 minutes.
And they're out of time. So that's just kind of a run through of most of the second half of the London Exchange. And I think a lot of the issues come out there. And I think, not all of you are going to want to watch this thing all the times that I did. So I watch it for you. There's my commentary. Again, as I said before, they touch on a lot of these kind of atheist tropes that I'm going to want to deal with. And what I think we really want to deal with is the question, okay, how can we understand well-being? How can we understand justice? How can we understand truth? Well, this is the conversation that human beings have been having for a very long time. Let's figure out how to do it well. So, there we are.